Islamabad is hosting 17th extraordinary session of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Council of Foreign Ministers. The OIC, regarded as the collective voice of Muslim world, is the second largest organization after UN. The summit will continue over 3 days with a compelling agenda of serious humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. Secretary General Mr. Hussain Brahim Taha was received by the Minister of State for Information and Broadcasting Farrukh. He met Foreign Minister of Pakistan Shah Mahmood Qureshi and discussed the preparations for the OIC. The Secretary General received several representatives and consul generals and was also presented the credentials of new ambassadors. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi had told 90 delegates invited to the summit had reached Islamabad and more were expected tomorrow. He also assured the Secretary Generals of Pakistan's support in regional stability. President Islamic Bank Dr. Mohammad Suleiman was also present. Pakistan has been deeply appreciated for its efforts to stabilize the region and its
Welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV World, an hour earlier than usual because of course something very unusual is happening in Pakistan. As you were looking at the report prepared by our team, of course the OIC extraordinary session is happening on the 19th of December in Pakistan. This conference is being held after a gap of 41 years and this is of paramount importance, particularly in reference to what Pakistan has been trying to achieve with regards to Afghanistan and of course helping avert the humanitarian and economic crisis that is currently existing in the country. We know that a lot of the countries are invited to this conference and there are high expectations from many different participants. Of course, the main agenda is on Afghanistan to be able to bring to ground tangible actions that can be taken with regards to helping the people of Afghanistan. We all understand and there have been reports that of course showcase the enormity of the situation and the urgency of the action that is required in order to help the people of Afghanistan avert the crisis over there. Pakistan, of course, has always taken responsibility in this regard. With this conference, we have delegates that have been invited from USA, China, Britain, Russia, the World Bank, EU, and of course other global organizations apart from the P5 countries. We also have representatives of Germany, Canada, Australia, and Japan, which of course means that this is one of the biggest conferences that is going to be held with regards to the situation in Afghanistan. And we all really hope that something comes out of it which can actually result in help for the people in Afghanistan. Many different issues are going to be discussed with regards to the commitment of the international community, the commitments made by the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, and how, most importantly, urgent help can be given to the people of the country. We'll explore all of this in much detail and see how exactly can this conference contribute to peace in Afghanistan. For this, of course, we have with us in the studios Mr. Farrukh Pitafi and Mr. Faisal. Thank you very much for being with us as always, gentlemen. And we will also be joined by respected guests online with us who will be talking about this conference as well. I will be talking about the guests who have been joined. We have been joined by Mr. Omar Karim, who's a research analyst at Royal Institute, United Services Institute, London. And we will also be joined by Fahim Al-Hamid, who's a Saudi journalist. And furthermore, we will be joined by Barrister Muhammad Ali Saif on telephone line, who's the Special Assistant to the Chief Minister, KPK. There are going to be many other guests today because this is going to be a 2-hour transmission. And we will try and explore all the different avenues with regards to this very important conference. Before we move ahead with what it is that we can expect from the OIC extraordinary session, first of all, I would like to comment on the fact that Pakistan, of course, has always played a very important role in terms of whatever is going on in Afghanistan, even before the Taliban regime came to power, and has done so even after that. This, of course, is one of the biggest steps that is being taken in this regard. Faisal, do you have high expectations from this conference?
Very high expectations from this conference. I think this is at this time happening at this time. I think it is very important because we need to understand one thing, that the situations, the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, they are mounting day by day, and obviously the weather is very severe in Afghanistan right now, and at this time the help from the world, it needs to be delivered as soon as possible. And looking at the facts that Pakistan has always been trying to negotiate or to tell the world that people of Afghanistan should not be abandoned the way they were abandoned in the early 90s, and they need help, and the world should come forward to help them. And this is why last month's Troika Plus, I think it played a key role in it, because Pakistan, when invited all of the powers to come to Islamabad, and Troika Plus was the moment when things started shaping up, because the realities, the ground realities of Afghanistan, they were presented in front of the participants, and of course peace of Afghanistan, it was discussed, and peace as well as the humanitarian crisis was highlighted by Pakistan. And now when the Muslim world is gathering, of course they need to know about the realities of today's Afghanistan, and ground realities are that people are suffering, and the whole Muslim Ummah should come forward and help them out, because without, if they don't help them, without their help, it would be very hard for the people of Afghanistan to sustain like this.
Absolutely. Umar, welcome to the debate. I hope you can hear me. I think we have lost contact with Umar, and we're going to try and get in touch with him once again. Moving on with the discussion, Farrukh, considering that we have a host of issues that need to be discussed, if at all we were to focus on some of the very important measures that can come out of this gathering, what would they be?
Right. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. And while I was listening to your question, I thought that perhaps you're going to ask me as well about hope. So I'm very hopeful, and I tell you why. There have been recently, of course, we are all journalists, so we keep on interacting with Western press and Western policymakers as well. And while the US was withdrawing, and then came the pledges from EU and Germany and the US and elsewhere. So repeatedly, every time we interacted, and it seemed that whatever is being offered is not enough, right? So one question kept on lingering in the mind, that what is the Muslim world doing? Because Afghanistan is a Muslim country, right? The first proof that something incredible is going to happen comes in the shape of this conference, which is very important. And from what we hear, the impulse came from the Saudis, right? And of course, they have deep pockets. They are very powerful, influential, and rich countries. So Afghanistan's macroeconomic stabilization, which is the biggest problem. Remember, their currency has plunged, but the only reason the currency is standing at this moment is just one thing. And that is, it doesn't have that kind of exposure to the outside trading world. Because of that, all these circumstances are taking place. The economy is crashing, and actually has crashed. Simultaneously, when you talk about the government's ability to pay salaries, there was a very serious brain drain that we saw, exodus of technocrats from the country. After that, whosoever remains, they are not being paid for months and months, right? So they need salaries, because critical infrastructure, for example, health, communication, and other aspects actually depend on that. So that is also a concern. Then, of course, is the matter of food, medicine, shelter for the people who have been disaffected. And they are in a very bad situation. It is a very cold, harsh, winter in Afghanistan. So just imagine all those kids who are sitting outside, who don't have that kind of, because of internal displacement and all, who are exposed to all this harsh weather. So it will be critical to find out how much aid can actually be collected. And I'm glad that not only the OIC members are coming here, but a very important thing is that Islamic Development Bank, its president has also arrived in Pakistan. So we are hoping that there is going to be some incredible and important momentum going forward to help Afghanistan.
Okay, let me ask you this, Faisal. Then, do you think that these pledges are going to be enough in terms of the situation in Afghanistan? And if so, are we looking at a certain number?
Looking at the certain number, earlier before the program started, we three were talking about it, the how much it could be. I think the number you mentioned earlier, you said $20 billion. I agree with you. I think around $20 billion right now, it is desperately needed to inject in Afghanistan right now. Plus, on top, of course, $9.5 billion, which is stuck in the Western banks and American banks. It needs to urgently, be given to Afghanistan right now, and that's what the sort of number I'm looking at. If it comes, the situation of the economy and situation of the people, the humanitarian crisis, it can be countered very well. But there is, Sana, there is another thing we really need to look into. Yesterday's story I was looking into, there was this story by one of the premier news agencies of the world, I must say, and obviously it's very reliable, Anadolu. There's this story that Daesh in Afghanistan is actually has started recruiting people from $270 to $450 a month, and they are attracting people. Of course, joblessness is at its peak, and they are inviting people to join Daesh. What happens when people start join, Daesh? You know that in our previous programs, we kept on highlighting this, that right now the dire situations are in Afghanistan, and whenever there is a situation as such of a dire nature, then of course people are forced to go towards these things. And we always highlighted that if we talk about Daesh, then ISIS Khorasan is considered as a backyard of Daesh and a breeding ground of Daesh. And if that breeding ground grabs on strength, then it is not only disastrous for Afghanistan, but the neighboring countries as well as the Western world as well. Because we should not be forgetting that in past we had incidents where Daesh was involved in terrorism in the Western countries. So Western countries needs to think about that as well.
Absolutely, Faisal, and I want to talk more about this for sure. Let me also welcome in the show our respected guest, who's a Saudi journalist, Mr. Fahim Al-Hamid. Thank you very much for joining us. I think we may have lost contact with our guest once again, but we're going to try and welcome him to the show and, of course, establish our contact once again. But before we talk about the threats and the very important issues that you're raising, Faisal, I want to come back to the idea of being able to raise a lot of money from this conference. At best, is this what we're looking at in terms of the outcome of this conference, that we are going to raise a lot of money? Is that good enough, an outcome from this conference, Farrukh?
Right, and that is a very good question, because of course we could have expected that magic is going to happen, and all the infrastructure that has started crumbling might actually get revived. But let us dream big, but keep our expectations simple, right? And what is the way to do that? The first thing that any country in crisis needs is money. And at this moment, Afghanistan's situation is such that three things happen. One, their previous government all collapsed, and the people who were working for that government left. Whosoever remains is not being paid. The army that collapsed also was not being paid for past many months when it collapsed, right? So in that situation, one has to actually look at the numbers, and Faisal actually mentioned 20 billion. It depends on whom you ask.
Right.
For example, our very good friend, a senior journalist, Ahmed Rashid, he wrote a couple of years ago about Afghanistan's critical needs and how much money Afghanistan needs to bail out the government every year. And the number was staggering 100 billion, right? That cannot happen. But a substitute for $9.5 billion is good enough at this moment if you want to stabilize the economy. True. And then this can also create a bridge, a functional bridge between Afghanistan and the Western world that can later on recognize and then release the funds.
So you mean to say that perhaps the unfreezing of the assets is not a requirement at the moment, and if you pledge a certain amount of money, it's one of the
No,
same thing?
it is a requirement, but it won't happen, right?
Okay.
So until that happens, you need some kind of measures to stabilize the economy.
True.
All right, let us welcome Mr. Fahim Al-Hamid, and we hope that he can hear us and has joined us in the show. He's a Saudi journalist. Thank you very much for being part of the debate. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, good to hear you. We, of course, are talking about the very important Foreign Ministers Conference that is being hosted by Pakistan. And this is extremely important with regards to the situation in Afghanistan. What is even more important is that we have a tangible outcome of this conference, something that actually benefits Afghanistan. Is that your expectation?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and my regards and salam to your distinguished guest. Before I address your question, with full respect, certainly with distinguished guest, we should not cry on the fallen milk. We should not cry and make tears on the on the fallen milks. Why? Because if we go for the past, it will take us centuries to talk about what happened in Pakistan and in Afghanistan, why it's happened, and this and that. Now, the fact is that there is 55 or more or less foreign ministers are invited by Pakistan, hosted by Pakistan. The call was from Saudi Arabia, and there is the superpower representation. They are attending that meeting, and the significance of this meeting, that Taliban delegation is attending that. So we should focus on this. How can Pakistan with Muslim countries can join hand? Number one, which is Taliban has to form an inclusive government. Without that, nothing going to take one step further. So it is we strongly believe that Pakistan, by hosting this conference, they will convince the Taliban to have one step, positive step towards to move and align with the international community. Yes, we understand that there is a major financial crisis in Afghanistan. Yes, the very true that they are going through a very difficult time in winter season and they have no shelter. The shelter is the ceiling. But the most important thing that Taliban should move ahead to be as a partner to the international community, to OIC. This is very high time that, we should not have a final communique, 10 or 15 pages, and there is no implementation. This is a golden opportunity. It's an historical opportunity which Saudi Arabia and Pakistan has joined hand to solve the crisis of Afghanistan. We cannot solve the crisis of Afghanistan within 3 days. But, however, we can convince the Muslim world, we can convince the international superpower that, okay, Taliban will take one step and we will take 3 steps. Other than this, brothers and sisters, it will be waste and time and energy.
Right. Fahim Sahab, I'm really glad that you actually framed the matter in this way. Saudi Arabia is a friend of Afghanistan. It is also a leader of Muslim world. Right now the question is, and your point about inclusive government is well taken, but regardless of what Taliban do, the Afghan people keep on suffering because of the harsh weather. So is there a possibility of multitasking while you engage with Afghan government or de facto government? You keep on demanding that they do whatever they can to be inclusive, and simultaneously you create some infrastructure to take care of the people who are suffering at this moment. That seems to be very serious an issue, and OIC has its own social uplift bodies. So can they work here?
Yeah, certainly everything is possible, brother, because those who are suffering for the last century, not Afghanistan, not Ghani's government, not other Karzai government. Those who are suffering in Afghanistan was the Afghanistani nation, whose generation has been ruined and hijacked, and they are, they left alone without anything. So the question, can Saudi Arabia help the Pakistani nation without the consent of the government? Yes,
Right.
there is NGOs, there is relief organization, there is, international organization, there is, OIC, but OIC cannot work, brother, as an official body unilaterally. If you speak about, an assistance to the Afghanistan nation, it has two way, either non-government or government. So, Pakistan and other countries has supported Afghanistan nation,
Right.
although they don't have relation with Taliban government. So the
Right.
first thing that, we have to institutionalize the relief. This
Right.
OIC forum can end up with announcing a fund for Afghanistan, relief.
Right.
55 countries, 75 countries, they can
And
donate, and Saudi Arabia will be in the front line of that, brother.
right,
But
inshallah.
first of
And
all,
that's a very good
all,
point.
let's
Let
have
me
a
ask you another
legitimate
very
government.
important question, Faisal. Regarding the significance of this conference, if you remember, last time there was a massive change in Afghanistan after the Taliban government fell. At that time, we saw Bonn conference that actually decided the contours of what kind of government there is going to be in Kabul. So, can we expect from this meeting to be as important as that?
No, because this do or die, brother. Why is do or die? Because, the West, they have their own interest. And I'm sure, I'm speaking with high caliber people. The West has their own interest, either Bonn or Moscow or whatever. They have their own. But we as a Muslim ummah, you as Pakistani, we as Saudi Arabia, we as OIC umbrella, we have no, any strategic interest, only to help the Afghanistani nation. So, Pakistan has made this effort, and I'm sure, Pakistan step, they have done the homework very nicely, because, I don't think Pakistan government or Pakistan policymaker, they want this conference as, as photograph session for family session or whatever. We
For
need a
sure, yes.
Yeah.
concrete, we need the concrete step which can be implemented. Three step, only three step. Let Taliban move one step, and you will see how the OIC will move 100 step.
Right. Mr. Fahim, I wanted to explore something similar you said earlier as well. Of course, you talked about how the Taliban needs to form a more inclusive government. And I was wondering how you use the word convincing them and perhaps the international community for certain steps as well. And I was wondering how to do that. And you said the Taliban, if they're willing to take one step, will take three and perhaps 100, as you mentioned right now. What exactly does that mean on ground? How do we really actually convince the Taliban to do something? Is there something that we can say or do that actually enables the regime in Afghanistan to form an inclusive government? If so, what is that step, or what are those three steps that you're referring to?
I will tell you, Pakistan, I'm not saying that Pakistan has a magic wand, but Pakistan has a wand. It's not magic. This is another story. Pakistan, with the history of their involvement positively in Afghanistan, because why Pakistan was a victim of Afghanistan for the last 30 years. So it is very high time, with the excellent relation between Pakistan and Taliban, they should convince them that this is the highest time that you should move one step And in parallel, they can see how can Muslim OIC can move. Without that, because the inclusive government is not now anymore OIC condition. It's an international requirement to be member of the OIC. I mean, I don't want to speak on the, on the air, but I want to be practical and rational. First step to have inclusive government, which Taliban has backed out.
Right. Since you have talked about inclusive government, we keep on hearing from the Western world as well. They have their own contours. Can you give us a broad outline of or yardstick to gauge what exactly will constitute an inclusive government?
Brother, very simple. It's not no. We don't want to give the narrative of West. We have our own narrative on the inclusive government, which is very, very simple. They should be all sect in this government. They should be all parties in this government. Pashtun, Tajik, Turkmenistan, and all sects which is a component of Afghanistan. You know, brother, more than me, that that Afghanistan is based on different culture and different tribe. Taliban alone cannot, brother, govern Afghanistan. Why?
Right, Mr.
Because,
Fahim?
this will be a mistake again.
Right, Mr. Fahim, you say this is simple, but it doesn't sound very simple to me. It's quite complicated to be able to engage all the different sects, all the different parties. That requires a lot of groundwork before that can happen. Don't you think?
It's for you very complicated because you are sitting in Pakistan and you are hosting the us, and we are engaging in controversial and issues. If Taliban leader, Haqqani group, and Akhundzada, and and the other leader, and you know what I mean exactly. The major power players in Taliban wants to have an inclusive, it will happen. And you know from your bottom of your mind that it's simple. And your government, they knew, is simple.
What's
And
the
your
hindrance here?
your agent.
Mr. Fahim, what's stopping them now? If it's that simple, they can take this decision. What are they waiting for?
You ask this question to Taliban. You should not ask me. We should ask Taliban. You should not ask your guest sister.
Right, of course. But at the end of the day, I want to understand how is it that we can actually convince the Taliban as well. But thank you very much, Mr. Fahim, for joining us and giving us your very valuable input in the show. Faisal, what do you think about what has been discussed so far? Of course, if the Taliban have to make a decision, and it's simple as a respected guest was talking about, then what sort of a convincing is required from Pakistan's side?
Sana, I think everyone is putting everything on Pakistan. Considering Pakistan to be very close to Taliban, it's not about the Taliban. The only concerns Pakistan always had were people of Afghanistan. Pakistan only wanted peace in Afghanistan rather than, supporting a side. Or there is no side for Pakistan. But, when Pakistan says inclusiveness, and the world obviously follows the same word, that inclusiveness. Pakistan says that and the world says that the government of Afghanistan should be an inclusive government. Fair enough. But there are precedents set by different factions inside Afghanistan. Earlier, Farrukh mentioned about the Bonn conference. A very good example. It was a failure just because, while they were conducting it in Bonn, they said it that if Taliban are not here, then why we are expecting that there would be a positive result out of it. Peace would not be endorsed in Afghanistan because there is a party that is actually, against whatever is happening in Afghanistan at that time. And the majority of the people they were, having there, they were the very people who I time and again repeated that they were the very people who were actually dropped in Afghanistan at Bagram Air Base in C-130s of the Americans, and obviously CIA was fully in touch with them. So it is considered as that they were the Langley boys. Openly I would say it. They were the Langley boys and they were talking to the Langley boys. And let me tell you, there are precedents which were set by the Northern Alliance, especially people like Rashid Dostum. People like Rashid Dostum, what they did was, there is this incident of Dashte Laili. In Dashte Laili incident, what was happened in late 2001, that there was this convoy of more than 3,000 Taliban. They were captured by obviously Rashid Dostum's forces. They were being taken to another city, and in the way there was this place called Dashte Laili, and openly they murdered around 2,300 Taliban in that incident.
And Killa Jangi also.
Exactly.
Killa Jangi.
And they did nothing about it. These are the war crimes committed by these people.
And we are going to explore that, the past as well. The only reason I brought up Bonn conference is not why, whether it was successful or not. It actually left out Wakil Mutawakkil and other reformist Taliban, which were important. But the fact is that they shaped the contours of next government, right? So whether this meeting is going to shape the contours, we are going to hear from our guest also.
Exactly. And Farrukh, the interesting thing is when the world is expecting the Taliban to have an inclusive government, do they mean that the Taliban have to have Rashid Dostum as well?
Right. Let's explore that further. Of course, we welcome in our show Mr. Umar Karim. He's a research analyst at the Royal United Services Institute, London. I hope you can hear us this time around, Mr. Umar.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. Welcome to the debate. We, of course, are discussing the OIC Foreign Ministers Conference, a very important event that Pakistan is hosting on the situation in Afghanistan. Before I talk about anything else, I want to know what you think it would be, at best, the outcome of this conference. What do you hope for?
I think we should keep our hopes relatively moderate, although there is clearly some concern within the Islamic world, and also there are certain political factors that are motivating, this summit, because it is very important that Saudi Arabia called for this emergency summit, and for Pakistan, it has cemented further its centrality within the Afghan issue because Pakistan is hosting it. But the real thing is, as you were discussing previously with our esteemed guest, Mr. Hamid from Saudi Arabia as well, that the West has, this is the tragedy of international power politics right now, that the West sets an agenda and then the rest of the world in one way or another way has to follow it, or if they don't adhere it, then there are other complications. So the West has set an agenda and they are treating the Taliban as a global pariah. They have no regard for humanitarian suffering right now, and they are not really ready to explore ways to bypass the Taliban government and to fund NGOs or other such actors to deliver some aid to the Afghans which are in dire need. The issue is that most of the Muslim world countries, including Pakistan, they are very careful in this regard to engage with the Taliban, but also not, you can say, adhere, not deliver their regime any certain kind of legitimacy. That's why Pakistan has also not accepted or not diplomatically accepted the Taliban government in Afghanistan. So although this meeting is happening, but if there are pledges, let's say big pledges, and there is no indirect mechanism for this money to reach out to Afghans, I am not sure that a lot of countries, they would be really willing to pledge this aid or this financial support directly to the Taliban government.
Right. And that's a very good point. Let me ask you about the yardstick, because from what you are saying, I understand that basically it is money that is going to be the yardstick. But when we are looking at the outcome, What are the key goals that you might actually look into the procedure, the process, and you might expect that these are the things, if something concrete comes out, we can say that this goal has been met, this goal has been met. The first goal, second and third.
I think the first goal would be engagement happening between the Taliban delegation, which will be coming and attending the summit, and OIC foreign ministers, because this would be the first meeting of senior level diplomats from all across the Muslim world and the Taliban leadership. So, and this is virtually happening. So this is already some sort of a success for the Muslim community, for Muslim OIC, as well as for the Taliban. The second important thing would be any significant aid pledge. I mean, anything, even $100 million or $500 million or whatever. If anybody says that we are going to give this amount, then that's a significant second good step as well. And the third, which is rather less likely, would be people announcing any sort of, not open-ended political acceptance of the Taliban regime, but maybe announcing that now the OIC committee would tour Kabul and engage with the Taliban government at their own turf. So that would be, in a way, a softer form of acceptance of the new realities in Afghanistan.
Some kind of mechanism. Earlier, you were mentioning Fahimul Hamid also, who was here. Let me ask you about this division or so-called division within Taliban, or at least the Muslim world's perception of that division. There's a Doha office. There's Haqqani Network, there are others. Do you think that in these pledges and these commitments, these aspects will also play out, and how they will play out?
I think the Doha variable, it only matters with Qatar or let's say with Turkey. For all others, the purpose of this Saudi call to host for this summit is that Saudi Arabia wants some stake in this situation. UAE wants its own stake. So both of these nations, I mean, they think that they are actors in their own self-worth, worth mentioning or worth involving.
What are
that
those
they will
stakes?
do their engagement on their own turf and not from Doha.
And Umar, what are those stakes going to be? Can you actually define the expectation?
The stakes would be, I mean, we should be very clear. I don't think so there would be any inclusivity or either, like, I don't think so that would be there in this conversation. The stakes would be, of course, UAE would want, you can say, some more projects or some more, you can say, duties to be given to its government or private companies, just like right now Qatar and Turkey are both jointly supervising and running the Kabul airport. Maybe the UAE would say that we can do this with the Kandahar airport because they have already been sending aid to Kandahar. Saudi Arabia is very important because a lot of Afghan nationals, they reside in Saudi Arabia and then they send remittances. And of course, next year, Hajj is also coming. The Afghans who want to travel to Saudi Arabia, they had to deal with the Saudi diplomatic mission. So Saudi Arabia in its own right has a religious standing, which it would surely want to cement in this conference. And I think that Saudi Arabia would also want some assurances on the Al-Qaeda file from the Afghan Taliban, because this was the very factor which led to the cutting off diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and the Taliban regime in the 1990s. So I think the Saudis would want some very clear assurances on the Al-Qaeda file.
Right.
Umar,
Yes, Faisal.
Yeah, Umar, I had a question. If we look at the situation right now, of course, a majority of the countries, they don't want to even engage with the Taliban, and obviously few of the Muslim countries as well, they don't want to. What if the situation turns out to be that there should be another country that can be used to help Afghanistan? And I just wanted to know, I think 3 days ago, there was a high-level meeting in Pakistan on security and obviously concerning Afghanistan as well, and in which Prime Minister of Pakistan said that if the organizations do not directly want to engage with Afghanistan, then we can offer Islamabad and they can obviously engage with Afghanistan through Islamabad. Could we see such kind of situation emerging as well out of this OIC?
Let me answer your first thing. Everyone is ready to engage with Taliban. They are all pragmatic players. They know the new reality on ground. But the additional aspect is, what will we get? Or if we will engage with you, but you make us one of the key central players. Now, Qatar has direct linkages, so Qatar doesn't need any new interlocutor like Pakistan. But yes, Saudi Arabia and UAE in particular, they can go through the Islamabad route, and they will be very willing to. But the onus is on Islamabad as well. How much can it sell itself to such actors who are quite keen to get involved within Afghanistan? Like you were previously mentioning about General Dostum, etc. Like General Dostum was a premier proxy of Turkey within Afghanistan. So if Turkey wants to get Dostum involved somehow, that's a problem with Islamabad. So all these
Turkey or Uzbekistan?
Turkey, because he spent 10 years in Turkey.
Yeah, but his party was called Galam Jam, and they are Uzbeks.
Yeah, Uzbeks, but there is this belt, the Central Asian republics. Of course, there is a Turkish sort of connection with them. They are Turco-Central Asian races, and according to my knowledge, I think for 10 to 11 years, Rashid Dostum and his family, they were facilitated by the Turks.
Okay, Umar, let me ask you this. We of course have seen that a lot of platforms and a lot of countries have taken the initiatives of bringing the engagement of the international community and the Taliban regime forward since they've come into power in Afghanistan. As a platform, OIC has also suffered what many other platforms have suffered in the past and continue to suffer, the fact that perhaps a lot of statements do come out and there is very little action on the ground. When we see this OIC Foreign Ministers Conference is of course extremely important for us, extremely important perhaps for the OIC countries and for Afghanistan as well. But is it being taken as seriously by the Western powers, particularly the US and other countries as well?
I think maybe not by the US, because the US is sort of least interested right now in Afghanistan. But European countries, countries like Germany, countries like Italy especially, they are very much interested within Afghanistan, and they also have, you can say, in case of the European Union, they have a softer image. They want to be active on humanitarian issues. So this can resonate very well with them. And if like the collective bloc of the Islamic world is getting behind something or some initiative, that would itself have some space. Also, I mean, it would further cement Saudi position very spectacularly, because OIC in a way is centered in Saudi Arabia. It's a body which is headed by Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia would also, I guess, like for Western world to get involved more broadly in this initiative. But as Mr. Hamid was also saying, what would be the files, we use the word file, on which Taliban would be ready to, you can say, compromise or give something in exchange. I don't think so it will be inclusivity, but I think that it would be more related to actions against ISKP, visible actions against Al-Qaeda and such other things.
Umar, I just wanted to ask another thing. As we know that everyone is emphasizing on this, that the human rights and women education and these sort of issues must be dealt by the Taliban if they want to talk. Of course, the Western world says that. But as we know that this is a process that is a sort of, we can call it evolutionary process, rather than, sudden, that overnight you have to change it. Could we see the OIC understanding these kind of issues and obviously looking at the cultural dimensions of Afghanistan, they might consider that, all right, we have to be a bit lenient on these?
In short, how independent will OIC's own judgment be from the Western perceptions?
Yeah, I agree. OIC, the very happening of this summit means that the OIC is much more pragmatic than the Western world. And right now, people are on the brink of a humanitarian disaster. They need food, they need warm clothes, they need such things. I mean, if there would be any people, what would the open schools do?
Sure.
How can they educate anyone? So I am quite sure that OIC countries are much more pragmatic than some of the Western countries. And also, OIC didn't lose in Afghanistan. NATO, the Western world did lose in Afghanistan, so they also have this sort of this thing haunting them, and that's why they're not really keen to engage within Afghanistan. But Islamic world, of course, they can engage, and also they are quite eager to really sit with the Taliban and to listen. And I think the third factor is geopolitics within the broader Middle Eastern world and Muslim world. That will also push different actors to engage with Taliban and not let this theater be monopolized by any single actor. I mean, Pakistan cannot.
And that's a great answer, although you said that the Western world lost in Afghanistan, ISAF included, all the world, including Muslim countries as well. But regardless, let me ask you, because we are repeatedly talking about what is going in Afghanistan and what kind of crisis there can be. Do we have any number figure as to how much money will it need to ensure that Afghan people actually come out of crisis, particularly about their food, shelter, medicine aspects?
I think right now anything ranging from $10 to $15 billion that's needed right now. The reserves number. They are like maybe in the tune of $6 to $7 billion. They are not going to be released as you suggested previously. So we are totally depending on this aid, which will be coming or possibly will be coming from the Islamic states. Let's keep our hopes moderate. But hopefully this will be this summit will be an opening to such an outcome in the longer run, and hopefully these countries, once they sit with the Taliban, they understand what are they up to, and they are being given some assurances. Then perhaps they can proceed further on to bigger pledges and financial aid.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Omar Kareem, for joining us and being a part of the show and giving your very valuable input. Faisal, it seems that there's a lot of emphasis on what the Taliban regime can and must do in order for things to go forward. Do you think any sort of emphasis is also being given in trying to persuade or talk to different members of the international community, more so the ones who are participating, in them also taking a step forward?
You know, that's why I think we have been emphasizing too much on Taliban to do something. I think there is much more needed by the world as well, because right now it is a humanitarian crisis we are dealing with, and it is a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. People are in dire need of help, and rather than getting into, oh, we don't like this and we like that, I think we should only be working for the humanity, and this is what the world needs to understand right now. Rather than telling about their preferences, they just need to get on the business, and the business is to save human life.
And that, of course, is extremely important, will be one of the topmost agendas of the conference. Farrukh, we'll have time to discuss more on this.
Just only one thing. While you can say what the world is going to do, you have to actually talk about what Taliban need to do, because they are actually end of business or point of sale or point of business, so to speak. Absolutely. They are on the grassroots and they can change things.
And absolutely. Let's actually just go to the headlines before we talk any further. We'll be back with more discussions till 10 p.m.